Testing 1, 2. Just going to chat into that. Can you make sure you bring that on? I can't see, but I've got glasses. Testing, testing, testing.
Why don't you move it around? Yeah, that's better. Yeah, I think that's okay. If you actually, could you do a little bit? Great.
So that's absolutely
Five minutes? Yeah, of course.
yeah, okay.
I mean, I think anybody who's on that screen should be able to present.
Whatever you see.
I'll make sure that those permissions are on. Yeah, everyone can share. So that's all good. Does this need to mute when there's presentation? Oh, okay. Great. Amazing. Okay. Yeah, I think that would be great.
Did you send it to my Gmail, Una?
No, I sent it to Rin.
Oh, I see. Okay, fine. Yeah, of course.
And is the first speaker a Zoom speaker after this?
Good question.
Jonathan?
Yes. Then yeah, it would be. I've got Rachel's presentation. Yeah, thank you.
Should be the second document.
Oh, I'm sorry. This one.
Or no, it's
Just go on the first page and then the second page as we down to and then that's the third page is the panel discussion.
Got it. All right. So, in which case, where did it go? Here it is.
Yes, I think there's like a schedule on the second page of this.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming today, and thank you also for our contributors online. My name's Una Murphy, and I'm a senior lecturer in journalism at the University of the West of England, UWE in Bristol, but I'm Belfast born and bred. So really welcome to our event today. I'm so pleased that people took the trouble to come out on a Saturday to be here with us. So the question posed by this symposium is, how do you make independent, local, public interest journalism sustainable? This event has been funded through UWE Bristol's Arts and Humanities Research Council Impact Acceleration Account Fund. The recent reports by MPs in the Digital Culture, Media and Sport DCMS Committee on sustainability of local journalism has set out the threats facing local journalism. And it was published before the cuts in local radio, which are planned by the BBC, which led to journalists to take strike action this week. And before the recent announcement of redundancies at Reach plc, the UK's largest commercial national and regional news publisher. The DCMS committee reports proposed establishing a public interest news fund, facilitating philanthropic funding to local news publishers, and ensuring that forthcoming digital markets legislation will allow smaller publishers of local news to reach fair commercial relationships with tech giants like Google and Meta. And talking about Google, I'm looking forward to hearing from MOBs from the Independent Community News Network, who has brokered a deal for independent journalism publishers to get revenue by uploading between 3 and 6 stories a day onto the Google News Showcase, which will lead to additional revenue for independent journalism publications. The Sustainability in Local Journalism report from MPs on the DCMS committee came 4 years after the Cairncross review, an independent report which flagged up challenges facing high-quality journalism in the UK. It would be fair to say that we know the problems. Time is ticking on, and an action plan is now needed. Organisations in civic society are leading the charge to bring about plans to create sustainability for local journalism outlets embedded in their communities. For example, in Wales, journalism practitioners, including members of the National Union of Journalists, are among those in a working group currently drafting a report on public interest journalism for the Welsh Government. Some might say that a radical approach is needed. Bristol has a history of alternative media, making it an interesting place for this discussion. I was delighted to take up a lecturing post in the city just under a year ago, as I've been involved in setting up an independent journalism outlet back home in Belfast, providing a different take on stories covered by the mainstream media and not covered at all in the mainstream media. Rachel Matthews from Coventry University, where I used to work, said to me, what is it about Bristol that makes it a useful location for alternative media? So hopefully we'll find out during this event. So joining us today in the watershed are Rachel Matthews, Elise Mason from the Bristol Cable, and joining us online are NME's Independent Community News Network, Francois Nell and Camilla Ramaggio from News Futures 2035, and Jonathan Haywood from the Public Interest News Foundation, which is launching a local news plan for Bristol, and he'll give us a sneak peek. A panel with representatives from England, Wales and Northern Ireland who are involved in local independent public interest journalism will be chaired by my colleague from UWE, Chris Brown, Senior Lecturer in Online Journalism and founder of Bristol 24/7. The panellists here in the watershed are Linda Tanner, an editor with Voice Hyperlocal Publications in Bristol, David Floyd, Social Spider, he's the MD of the company, which is a social enterprise, and they run community newspapers in London. Brian Peelan, View Digital Editor, he edits Social Affairs magazine View and our website in Belfast. And Nick Powell, Chair of the National Union of Journalists, Welsh Executive Council. Welcome all. This event is being recorded. The proceedings will be written up and distributed to everyone taking part. So please get involved and have your say in what I hope will be an enlightening and useful discussion that could lead to moving forward a local news plan for Bristol. We'll have a break around 11 and lunch is available later. I'd like to take the opportunity to welcome everyone who's joining this symposium online and in person. Sorry, did I press? I'm not sure. Yeah. Okay, so I'm finished now. So I want to hand over to Jonathan. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. So our first speaker is Jonathan Haywood, Executive Director of the Public Interest News Foundation, who's joining us online. Over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Una. Can you hear me okay?
Oh,
Are you hearing?
hold on. Sorry, Jonathan. We just need to work out how to.
I'll keep chit-chatting, and then when you hear me, it'll kick in.
Yeah, hear you.
How about that? Shall I try again? How's that? Yeah, that's good. Okay, shall I kick off? And are you seeing?
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, we've got you now. Kick off.
Brilliant. Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Una. And I think I can see from the image on my screen that I think you're seeing my slide presentation up on the big screen? Yeah, thumbs up. Brilliant. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Una, for organising this. I'm really sorry that I'm not with you in person in Bristol. The trains obviously are not carrying us around the country today, but Zoom is. So we're here with you virtually. I'm going to talk a bit about this project that we've been running at the Public Interest News Foundation over the last few months, where we worked in Bristol, amongst other places around the UK. I'll just very briefly explain who we are. So the Public Interest News Foundation is the first charity in the UK that exists entirely to support high quality independent journalism. We launched just before the pandemic, and we spent the last 3 years trying to do everything we can to build the capacity of those independent providers of public interest news, those like View Digital in Belfast, like the Cable in Bristol, and many others across the UK. So we do what we can to provide funding, leadership development, networking, to research the sector so that we can share best practice and understanding of what works and what's not working, and also to advocate on behalf of the sector alongside people like Emma at ICNN, who you'll hear from in a moment. So our basic animating belief is not just that independent news providers should have a nice life. I mean, we think they should, but really we believe in what we're doing because of the public. We think everybody in the UK should benefit from high quality journalism that speaks to them, for them, and with them. And it's the with them part of that equation that I really want to focus on today, because to go back to your question, Una, that you've set us, how do you make independent local public interest journalism sustainable? I just want to change one small word in that and think about how we make independent public interest journalism sustainable. Because I think our sort of animating belief is that unless this is working for the public, and unless the public are really buying in to what we're trying to achieve, not necessarily in a financial sense, but buying in a kind of emotional sense to what we're trying to achieve, then really what's the point? Independent journalism exists to support communities, and we want to feel communities really see the value in that. That way, maybe we can start to unlock a more sustainable financial model. So the project that we've been running is called the Local News Plans Project. I think most people on this call and in the room will know some of these factors about why we wanted to launch the project. We all know that local news drives civic engagement. It gets people involved in our local communities, voting, taking part in democratic processes, but also simply having conversations about what's going on. It drives accountability for local bodies, for private sector bodies as well. And actually, money that's spent on public interest news can generate all sorts of additional benefits to society by reducing corruption and waste in public spending. It makes that more efficient, but it can also get people shopping on the high street. It can get people spending money locally. So we think that local independent public interest news has all sorts of exponential benefits for the communities that it serves, not just spreading accurate information, although spreading accurate information is really important. And also in particular, locally based, truly local public interest news, as opposed to companies like Reach, which Una mentioned a moment ago, which have got headquarters in London and shareholders all over the world. Truly local businesses, local news businesses, like other truly local businesses, tend to keep a lot more of their economic value in the communities that they serve. The profits they generate are not extracted and sent off to shareholders in far-flung places. So there's all sorts of reasons to think that local independent public interest news is a good thing, but the number of papers has fallen over the last 10, 15 years. Many areas are news deserts. People increasingly depend on social media for news. And actually, this is not just a UK problem. At a global level, the UN Secretary General has warned of what he called a media extinction event. So this is not just something that should concern a few of us who worry about life's luxuries. This is something which is fundamental to society, not just here, but around the world. And as Una mentioned, recent funding initiatives, which are supposedly designed to support local news, to be frank, haven't worked, or they haven't delivered. And the DCMS Select Committee observed that of those various funding initiatives, the largest publishers, Reach, Newsquest, and National World, have taken what they called a disproportionate share of the support available to the detriment of smaller publishers and those entering the market. So something's got to change. So what we've been doing over the last few months to try to address this is actually to get out of Westminster and London and stop talking to national policymakers and funders and go down to the people for whom this really matters, which is the local communities that local news is supposed to serve. So we went to 6 places across the UK: Bangor in Wales, Bristol, where you are, Folkestone in southeast England, Glasgow, obviously in Scotland, Manchester, and Newry in Northern Ireland. And in each of those 6 places, we worked with a range of stakeholders to try to create what we called a local news plan for that area. So the model for a local news plan is something like a neighbourhood plan. So I don't know if any of you have ever been involved in a neighbourhood plan process, but anywhere in the UK, a community has the right to come together to create a plan which sets out that community's priorities for development. So normally that's around, building, plannings, open spaces, parks, green space, and so on. We said, well, why don't you take that principle of the neighbourhood plan and bring that to thinking about local news and create a local news plan that would set out what do the people in that place want their local news to look like. And we've done that with Samir Padania and with News Now, the UK's independent news discovery platform, who also provided the funding for the project. So in each place, we appointed a steward. We're very delighted that Aliz, who's with you today, was our steward in Bristol, and a steward in each place who know people. The stewards know the people on the ground, could bring together stakeholders from private, public, and voluntary sectors. And in each place, we got together for at least a half-day workshop to talk about what people think about local news at the moment and what we can all together be doing to support it. So it wasn't just meant to be a sort of moan fest where we sit and think, oh, it's so unfair that policymakers or funders or platforms are to blame, but actually trying to think a bit more creatively and constructively about what we might all be doing differently that could try to unlock a more sustainable future. And each of those workshops then generated the very, very first draft of a local news plan. Now, at this stage, these are very embryonic. If you go on the Public Interest News Foundation website, you can see the plan for Bristol. Essentially, it sets out in very broad terms the kinds of things that people are concerned about, the kind of value that they'd like local news to bring in the community, and some ideas about how that might take shape. But there's a long way to go, as we can talk about in a moment. The kinds of things that we heard around the country, everywhere is different. That's one of the amazing things we discovered through the project. The UK is a collage of nations and regions and communities, and there's so much nuance and difference between places, which again is why the top-down approach to local news doesn't work. If it's not local, it doesn't reflect the complexity and character of the places of our country. But we did hear similar themes. So we heard people saying things like, well, we used to know the local reporter, but they've gone now, and it's just a void where they used to be. In Bristol, people were very focused on this question of sustainable funding models. In Folkestone, people were talking about the lack of diversity. They live in a very diverse community in Folkestone, but local news doesn't reflect that. Glasgow, people saying, look, it's just not local enough. Glasgow is a big city, but within Glasgow, there are very different communities with very different interests and different priorities and concerns. Same in Manchester. They've got the Manchester Evening News, but people describe that as having simply a veneer of local news padded out with a lot of celebrity and national stories. And in Newry, among many other things, people talked about the challenges of engaging younger people in local news. I'm not sure, there we are. So 3 main findings that we drew from the process. The first one is really that local people believe local news should be truly local. Now, this should not need saying, but I think in a context where most local newspapers in the UK are still owned by those 3 corporations, and people are telling us, well, it's not local, we need to just get this really front and center of our minds. Local news should be local. People do not want what they call cookie cutter local news that is the same more or less wherever you go. They want something that's really distinctive, that really reflects their areas, that they can then feel pride and connection with. We also found, again, no surprise to people in this room, but it needs to be emphasized to others, that people are really struggling to meet this need sustainably. So the commercial providers are chasing clicks and profits, and the independent providers are not. The independent providers are trying to create real value for the communities that they serve. But everywhere we went, where we engaged with people in that sector, I know there are many in the room who we'll hear from later this morning, but it's really hard. It's really tough. People are burning out. They're working way beyond what they should be doing to keep their organizations going and to keep serving their communities. And there's a real question mark about whether that's sustainable. But the more positive side is that these local stakeholders, once you get people talking, whether they come from the local council, the local business community, local charities, community organizations, arts organizations, they are keen to support new funding models. They recognize that there is a problem, and they've never been asked before about how might you be part of the solution. And there's a long way to go to develop those conversations, but they're keen to be part of the conversation and to see new funding models come through. So what we recommend then to try and bring this together is a kind of new approach. So rather than just thinking about top down, rather than sitting in the capitals of the UK and devising clever policy initiatives or rolling out national level funding schemes, what we think is a whole shift in mindset, that we should think about local news as something which has to be utterly integrated in local communities, and where we try to create a virtuous cycle of value, where local news adds value to the local community. The local community really appreciates that value and is then able to put value back into the local news to create something sustainable. And our model for that is the principle of what's called community wealth building. So the community wealth building ideal has been pioneered in Preston. We'll hear from Francois Nail in a moment, who's based in Preston. He might say something about that. But the essence of community wealth building is that you do not allow the wealth, the assets, the value of your local community to leach out to distant shareholders or others. You try to hold as much of it in the community as possible and create that virtuous cycle. So that's what we're calling for. 3 examples of what that might look like in practice. So firstly, we would love to see more of these local news plans developed. Like neighbourhood plans, local news plans can act as a catalyst to bring people together, get them really thinking about the role of local news in their area, get them thinking creatively about that, not just what they had in the past, but perhaps what might be better and different in the future, and get them involved in thinking about solutions to that. So that planning process can both set a framework for the future, but also it's really valuable in and of itself. It just gets people talking and building new relationships. So we definitely think that's part of the solution. One more concrete idea about money is that local advertisers should be encouraged to allocate a share of their budget to news providers that meet the criteria that have been set by the local community. So rather than advertisers simply thinking, oh, well, I'll advertise with national media or I'll advertise with Google and Facebook, they should be encouraged to think about the added value that they would get by advertising with local outlets, because that would actually generate that economic well-being in the local community, which in the long term should be in the interests of those advertisers. And that's true both of commercial advertisers, local businesses, but also local public bodies. If you're the local authority and you need to put out those notices telling people about planning developments and tenders and job contracts and so on, you should not be advertising with national media or nationally owned media where the value of those contracts is all sucked away. You should be advertising with truly local providers, which then add value to the community and create more thriving, sustainable places. And then finally, if there is to be funding, and we think there should be a national public interest news fund. We've always been very clear about that. But what we'd like to add to that vision is that it should be managed and brought together with other sources of funding through independent, locally oriented foundations. So in an ideal world, you'd have a whole array of local news foundations around the UK, which could hold, some of it might be Westminster money, some of it might be from the devolved administrations, some of it might be from other philanthropists, some of it might be from big tech. All those sources of money should go into these specialist foundations, which then distance the money from the funder, so there's no risk of them messing around with the editorial independence of the news that they're supporting, and those local foundations can then be really tuned in to the needs of those communities and making sure that the funding as it flows through is going towards the kinds of initiatives that really command the loyalty and trust of local people, and again, not flowing off to those international corporations. So I'll wrap up there. I mean, we're really keen to do more in this space. With the generosity of News Now, we've been able to do what's essentially this pilot project going into these 6 places. We'd love to stay working in the 6 places. Bristol, fantastic working in Bristol and the other 5 places. We'd love to see more local news plans in other places. And right now, we're trying to find some national funders that can come in behind this, that can help us to build on that work and start to maybe even pilot 1 or 2 of those local models where we'd get a bit of national funding, a bit of local funding, and start to trial things. I do think it will take a hell of a lot to move things forward here, but I do think, just to come back to where I started, it's about the we, not the you or the I. You know, we, all of us together, ICNN, PINF, Independent Media Association, UCLAN, UE, people of Bristol, all of us are going to have to get together. But I think there is a solution out there, and I will pause there.
Very much. Thank you very much, Jonathan. It was very good of you to do that presentation for us, to bring us up to date with the local news plans for places like Bristol and Newry in Northern Ireland, Manchester, Glasgow and Folkestone. Did I miss any of them out? No. And I think here in Bristol we'd be really excited to see how we can move on, you know, both from people who work in academia and people who work as practitioners in industry. So watch that space, and hopefully we'll see if there's any movement towards, you know, some funding being provided to get it to the next stage. Thank you indeed. Jonathan, we're going on to MMEs now. MMEs is the director of the Independent Community News Network, ICNN. So the new partnership between ICNN and Google News Showcase was just announced yesterday, and it has been described as an opportunity to cement the independent journalism sector within the wider UK media ecosystem. So over to you, Emma. Thank you.
Hi there, thank you very much for having me. Apologies, I was meant to be there in person today, but childcare issues stopped me from making it to Bristol, but I'm really delighted to be here virtually. I'm not as slick as Jonathan with his slides. They were very fancy slides, Jonathan, so I'm just gonna, you know, waffle on and then hopefully give you all an opportunity to ask as many questions as you want afterwards. So as Una said, it was a really, really big day for us yesterday. We had the launch of or the announcement of the Google Showcase, which is a big deal. So my colleague and Deputy Director of ICNN, Matt Abbott, has been working tirelessly for about 18 months on the legalities behind the scenes of making this happen. So basically, what we managed to achieve, and we could announce yesterday, is that the Google News Showcase has been set up for a while, and traditionally has only worked with traditional news publishers. And so yesterday, you know, in a watershed moment for the industry, 45 independent titles have now signed up to the Google News Showcase. And that'll mean they better connect to their audiences, they can strengthen their offering. And that means that they now get a financial support, which is provided by Google, and that'll help them build a much needed sustainable element and to cement the sector within the wider journalism ecosystem. So they will now get funding. So we know that the big tech giants came under attack for just, you know, taking content, making revenue, selling ads, and then nothing going back to the original journalists and content creators. So once that started being shouted about, then you know, as always happens, the larger players were straight in there, they got heard, action was taken, and then it's taken us longer to get any impact and action for smaller independent publishers. But what this has done is proven that how much value there is and how much power there is in collaboration. So I think the key word that I want everybody to leave with today is collaboration, that working together rather than working in silo. And we've already done it as organisations, as Jonathan already mentioned. There's us, there's UCLan, there's PIMF, there's various other organisations, and we've seen the power in working together, working towards the same aim, rather than working against each other for glory. We've all decided to pull together, and it's working brilliantly in the UK. I'm really, really, really proud of the ecosystem of support that we are creating. And now we are providing a system and a platform where independent news publishers can actually collaborate and work together as well. So there's two things we've been working on. We've been working on the Google News Showcase, and a couple of our members, we were on a Zoom call talking about it last week with the 45 members that have signed up to the Google Showcase. So how it works is that they have a panel, and they have to upload 3 stories a day, every single day, every day of the year, come Christmas, come bank holiday, come rain, hail, shine. They have to upload 3 stories, but Google gives them money. So they know that over the course of a year, they will get a set amount of funding for those stories. And larger news organizations can then have 2 panels, which means that they have, they have to commit to providing more news, but that means that they then have more financial stability again. So this, one of our members said last week, when they were setting up their news publication, if there was the opportunity for them to have a set income for their journalism, it's a game changer. So, we've got people recognising the value of now knowing that they've got a steady income coming in. So this is only the start. We need to build and work on this. The other thing that we've been working on is our news platform called Ping News. So the Ping platform, which is a public interest news gateway, and it's a tech platform. So since I started, I started and set up the Centre for Community Journalism at Cardiff University 10 years and 9 months ago, and very early on, I realised that larger news publishers were creaming off copy from our members, and we're not giving them any thanks, we're not giving them any recognition, we're not giving them any financial support. They were just saying, thank you very much, we're going to take this content and we are just going to use it, and why shouldn't we? It's out there in the public domain. So other people might say cutting and pasting, I basically say stealing. They're basically stealing other people's content because they're going off and making money. We know there's money to be made in news, but it's usually made further up the news food chain. And we also know that where the really good quality, trusted, valued news is created is at a very local, independent level, with people who are on the ground, walking the beat like we used to do as journalists years ago. So what we have devised with Ping is a platform which there's now a system in place to stop that from happening. So if anybody wants to use that content, they can do it, but they now have to sign up to Ping, which is launching in May. So it's effectively like a hyperlocal news agency. So all our members across the UK, as they're uploading their content to their news websites, they can also upload it to the Ping system, which means that there is a continuing, evolving repository of news stories from across the UK. So a bit like it's effectively like a hyperlocal news agency. So rather than cutting and pasting from those individual websites, if any of the larger titles now want to use that content, then they subscribe in the same way as they would to PA News or any other news agency. It also gives them a direct link back to those independent journalists. So if somebody is, there's a fire and they are out there and they're covering the story, then if one of the larger publishers want ongoing content on coverage of that, then rather than send their own reporters, they can directly approach the journalist on the ground from the independents. And if the independent so wishes, they can then work a bit like a stringer, and they can, arrange a fee for the news titles. To completely flip the system on its head and to say, we've got all things we need to start understanding and we need to start having is another C word is confidence. So as an industry and a sector, we now need to have confidence. When I first started over 10 years ago, we were still being described as bloggers in the bedroom. You know, I'm really, really glad to say that we've come a long, long way from being described as bloggers in the bedroom. We still have a long way to go. I still sit on, you know, DCMS meetings and still hear loads of nonsense being spouted by larger publishers. But I think it's really important that we look at, when we look at any ecosystem, you don't just have big players or small players or large creatures and small creatures. And you don't have ones, you know, you don't have the sharks, the whales, the dolphins trying to kill the minnows. They all, you know, live equally happily, and everybody's got a role to play in the ecosystem. And the news ecosystem is no different. We all have a role to play. But I think what we need to do now is we now need to have respect. So when we talk about collaboration, it's always been the larger news publishers have always tried to say, oh, well, we're happy for you to collaborate. What can we do to help you? And I think we now need to have the confidence to say, it's not what you can do for us, it's what we COVID and during lockdown, that actually sometimes it's a one-man band, but equally that size makes us very agile, and it offers a lot more opportunity for them to be robust in some way. They can weather the storm. So our members, we didn't lose any titles or any members during lockdown. And since then, we're still finding that small independent newsrooms are continuing to thrive. They're not just surviving, they're thriving. We are getting more members and more news publications opening up. And I think there's a lot to be said about that. So we need to have the confidence to say it's not, you know, we know that the larger titles are taking content from smaller titles. We know that's happening for a fact. And that's happening for a reason, because they've got people on the ground, because they're producing excellent quality journalism. So I think collaboration is key. Collaboration amongst independent newsrooms, because there's strength in numbers. So we collated, I can't say that these statistics are still true for now, because I haven't looked at the latest stats, but during lockdown we looked at our membership, we looked at the reach, we looked at the readership of our members during when lockdown first hit, when COVID first hit and we went into lockdown. And at that time, if you looked at all the members of ICNN and put them together as and address them as a cooperative, we at the time were the equivalent of the 4th largest news publishers in the UK. So we hear about the big 5. Actually, we would have knocked the 5th one off the bottom slot, and we would have gone in 4th place. So there's no way that governments and large organisations would ignore the 4th largest news publisher in the UK. So it's up to us to make sure now that we can no longer be ignored. And a big stepping stone to that has been the Google Showcase. So we're the only country as a UK, the only country in the whole world that's managed to broker a deal like this. So it's groundbreaking to show that by working together and collaborating, we can achieve big things. And then there's the opportunity now that we've got the Ping platform. There's an actual tech platform that makes collaboration and working together much, much easier. So really exciting times. And we're looking forward to continue to collaborating with the other organisations that are on the call today as well. So I'll stop waffling and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Emma. That's great. Our paths once crossed at BBC Wales, and now we're both working in the independent sector, so it's quite interesting what's happened next. Yeah, I do think that the independent publishers could be collaborating a lot more personally, and I think what we've got from Emma is a groundbreaking opportunity to work with tech platforms, hopefully to bring in more revenue. So we'll really be watching that space. Thank you, Emma. We'll take Rachel Matthews next, and then we'll have a Q&A about all 3 speakers' contributions. Rachel is the chair of the local community network at MEXA, the Media Communication and Cultural Studies Institute. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Una, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak. I think I've got a slightly different perspective from the previous 2 speakers. Because I'm sort of thinking perhaps a bit more theoretically about things. And I'd really like to get my slides up if that's possible. Sorry. Oh, I don't want to mess up the Zoom.
There you go.
Brilliant, thanks.
Oh, no, thanks.
No.
Not now. There you go.
Lovely, super. Yeah, right. So I'm at Coventry. I've been there for quite a long time. Before that, I worked in local newspapers for a very long time. And so a lot of the sort of the perspective I come from, I mean, I have obviously got quite a lot of lived experience in newspaper experience in the industry, but I have also, for my sins, written a history of the local newspaper as a form. If anyone really wants to know more about the local newspaper, which is why I asked Una that question, because in Bristol there's a really strong tradition of resisting corporate newspaper ownership. So the Bristol Post was founded by people who put money together to buy that, to set that paper up. And obviously now we've still got that same process at work in Bristol. And so it's often led me to wonder, what is it about Bristol that makes you so determined to have your own local news? Which I haven't answered that question today, I'm afraid. I'm really sorry. I've had to put quite a lot of legwork in, I think, to be able to do that and go around sitting in archives, which I love. I don't always have the luxury of doing that. But what I've also, I think, is perhaps a bit of a barrier to some of the questions that we're asking today. So I'm going to perhaps put up a fence and then suggest a way of getting over it. I mean, for me, I think we do know that local journalism is valuable, but I think for me that concept is really muddied because of the local newspaper industry, which sounds really awful, doesn't it? Because the local newspaper industry has said for years that it exists to benefit local communities and would still say that. I mean, this Making a Difference, Journalism Matters, is the annual campaign from the News Media Association, which represents local newspapers. But actually, when you look at how those newspapers operate in detail, and they say that they benefit communities, often what they mean is they benefit a community that is equivalent to a commercial market for that newspaper, which is why we get the gaps in coverage that people are talking about in the communities which aren't served, and which many of you are obviously trying to counter through the work that you're doing in the independent news sector. The problem is that obviously we've already said those newspapers have a big voice, and that in many ways, for many policy people and those high-level discussions, it's that model of community benefit which kind of dominates their understanding. So in a way, for me, I think that one of the things that it's good for us to be able to do is to suggest different ways and to retell that story about the benefit of community news, if that makes sense, or what I would say local journalism, because I think it's slightly difficult because not all newspapers are the same. I could point you towards some brilliant independent local newspapers. I'd say newspaper, I don't just mean something on paper anymore. I tend to think of those legacy news products. So it's a mixed environment out there, isn't it? We've got things like Manchester Evening News that, as Jonathan said, people might say it's only got a veneer of local content, and that's been probably getting worse and worse for many years. So we basically got this idea that local journalism compromised by the industry that actually is geared around providing it. But the other thing that comes out of all of this for me is that people, and we need to have opted into this effort to sustain local news, really care about it. They really care about the provision of local journalism in their community. And for me, this was really brought home when the Coventry Evening Telegraph, which is a really big established newspaper in Coventry, at its heyday, incredibly successful, selling about 100,000 copies a day in the 90s, really strong, loads of reporters, staff of hundreds, and then they, in the way that a lot of corporates have, closed their city centre office that they've been in for 50 years and moved to the edge of town with, a huge reduction in staff, chucking all the archives away as they did it. And so something really strange happened because somebody was buying this building to turn it into a hotel, which they have done. It's now called the Telegraph Hotel. that derelict building was open to the public for, sorry, is it when I'm standing on this cable? Let's not stand on it. Yeah, so they opened this building to the public, and you know, people went round it. Now, I've been around it too, but I've been in it when it was a newspaper office, a functioning newspaper office. So when I went round it, actually, I found it really sad experience for me to go around it as a journalist. But all the people in Coventry that obviously for years and years wanted to get behind that sort of traditional mahogany desk were desperate to go and have a look around this building. And it just really brought home to me, I wasn't standing on it then, I promise, it really brought home to me how important these institutions have become. And because, you know, and so really what there's more than the local journalism, more the information that matters to people. You know, so when people think about why people care about local journalism and the organisations that produce local journalism, for me, it's not just about the information that is being shared. It's not just about that community thing. It's also about the social role that these organisations serve. And I think that increasingly, particularly again in the independent news sector, we can see that this kind of different role of journalism is coming to the fore. So, you know, I know I'm surrounded by lots of people who've worked in the news industry for many years here, and the people who've worked particularly in that traditional sort of local newspaper industry, where you would have had that venue like the Coventry Evening Telegraph in the city. People would have gone to that building for all sorts of reasons. They would have rung you up when they needed to know who to contact about something. They obviously would have come to you with stories when things weren't working, like, you know, poor social housing has been a staple of local journalism for years and years. So you're part social service, you're part open space. You know, when people know the journalists, when they have that daily contact, you know, you're part of the community and you're on the streets and you're visible, then you perform a much wider service than just actually, you know, sharing information. So where am I? Yeah. So as Jonathan said, there's lots of evidence around how information, the information that local journalism supports, how that benefits people in terms of increasing financial scrutiny of local authorities, increasing voter turnout, those sorts of things. But I suppose for me, there's also a way of considering the wider social benefit of local journalism in terms of thinking about providers and provision that's creating third spaces. And third spaces is a sociological term that came out of America when there was a concern about loss of community with the creation of suburbs, you know, people were losing their local neighbourhoods. But for me, I think it's, you know, they're understood to be really important to social infrastructure, because by having these spaces that enable people to get together and support social relations, then what you actually do is you strengthen community in general, not just things that might be a product of the information that you put out. And so I think that the physicality of, you know, physicality of news can contribute to this as well. And it's really interesting that Greater Copenhagen and Ferret have just got together to open a social space associated with news products, so that, you know, for community building activities, and I would see that you can even go and co-work there. So you can see that by having organisations that have spaces and do different things, that actually you make all sorts of things happen as a way of that. And I think it continues that tradition of being a bit of a community service, you know, perhaps you want to see it a bit like that, you know, in the terms of the things that you do. And I'm sure you get people coming to you all the time asking you for questions for help and support. So then what you have is you have local, local journalists. Stop crying. Oh, I've broken it now. So you can think of local journalism as contributing to things like social capital, which people understand as the glue that binds communities together. And the reason, I suppose, for me, it's interesting to pursue this as a line of thought, because this is the language that policymakers use, particularly in relation to the levelling up agenda. I mean, I don't know if you've read the London White Paper. It's quite long. It uses the word social capital on multiple occasions. It's really coming from that perspective of supporting communities, of using that kind of language, those kind of sociological perspectives. So for me, it's tricky because it offers both an opportunity and a bit of a threat in a way. Because it's an opportunity to advocate, I think, the wider benefits of local journalism practices. But at the same time, then you start to think about things which are slightly intangible. You know, in a way, it's much more easy to say, you know, voter turnout in local elections was poor. We did some stories on the local election, and voter turnout improved. You know, and that's fairly straightforward. But actually, what we're talking about here is something that's really quite hard to evidence, and how do we do that? And that's why I think things like Jonathan's news plan, the neighbourhood news plans kind of have the potential to start reaching into these sorts of needs, these sorts of needs that people have. I mean, I know myself quite often when we work with people and talk about what they want from news, they tend to just say, oh, more of what they already know. So they might say, well, I think that coverage of local sports and I would like to see more sport. You know, rather than actually going into those creative ways of thinking that might actually broaden out, pull out some of these wider things. I mean, I spent a couple of weeks ago, I spent a morning in the bottom of the multi-storey car park in Worcester with Worcester Civic Society, who has taken on the archives of the local daily paper, which has moved into a small newspaper. So they have literally taken 700,000 photo negatives, which they are scanning in individually on a flatbed scanner. And the library things, you know, from the entire library, you know, newspapers have traditionally had really big libraries. Now, why do those people do that? Obviously, they see it as preserving a part of the heritage of the city. But for them, it's also about preserving the newspaper, which is such an important part of the city's heritage itself. So, you know, it's trying to work out what, you know, and there's a group of mainly retired people who have a really great purpose now. Keeping them together provides a platform for socialisation, provides a platform for, you know, all sorts of other activity. You know, and that's, you would never think of that when you said how local journalism might benefit communities. It's like a completely different tangent. But, you know, I think that really is, you know, good thing to think about because it's much wider and it's deserving sorts of things that deserving of support. So then what we get to is kind of the idea that local journalism as being part of social infrastructure. You know, and we think that, you know, we want good roads, we want good transport systems. So why should we not want good local journalists that actually supports us and the way we live in the same way as being able to get from A to B on the bus, which I know is increasingly difficult, particularly where I live. So I think that, you know, I suppose what I'm saying is I think that by drawing on these things, it helps shore up some of those wider arguments for the benefits. I mean, there are obviously reviews going, you know, I didn't know about the Welsh policy review. Actually, that's really interesting. I do spend quite a lot of time talking with the DCMS, and they do have to be able to advocate for these kind of sectors in the language that the government operates in. You know, whether we like it or not, you know, you've kind of got to meet them on their own territory, haven't you? So I think that, you know, for us, if we can start advocating for the role of local journalism in these ways, then it thinks about not only the tangible things that we're more accustomed to thinking about, but we can try to bring in some of this more intangible benefit that is out there that these processes have. You know, it just adds to that argument of why, you know, it's deserving of maybe policy support, funding support, philanthropic support, you know, as well as opening it up to different stakeholders perhaps. So that's kind of where I am at the moment with thinking about things. It's all a bit not as concrete as some of the things that people have been talking about this morning. But I think it offers us some interesting ways of looking, of getting evidence together for the future, actually.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Thank you very much, Rachel. It was great to have you, particularly as we used to work together in Coventry University, so it's nice to keep the connection. I was just trying to work out what your Twitter handle was there. It's at
Prov News History.
Prov News History. Okay.
Prov News History, because I've
So PR. I will find it, and also everyone else is tweeting into the hashtag local news, and do give us a call at UWE journalism, UE journalism, because I got the funding from you to run this event today, and one must give credits due. So we've had 3 speakers giving really interesting input about the community journalism and local journalism sector. And we've heard about new developments like tech giants like Google are going to give us some revenue through the deal brokered by the Independent Community News Network. We've heard from Rachel about the social capital, which creating that third space for local journalism, and I was very sad to see the newspaper office where I started off my career in Belfast up for sale, and it's been sold on now, a heritage building, but the journalism still goes on, but the building and that civic space that they had is no longer there. So why don't we have a quick chat before our break at 11 o'clock about some of the issues that have been raised by the 3 speakers, and I'm just wondering if anyone would like to make a start. Maybe yourself, Alexia.
One of the things that I'm really multitask.
Thank you.
And one of the things that I'm really interested in is the sort of culture of news consumption, I suppose. And I'll leave that to you.
Yes.
I am really interested in the idea that we need to kind of rebuild that social contract. I was really interested in what you were saying, particularly at the end there, Rachel, that I think there needs to be a lot more done to help people understand why it's important to pay for news. And, you know, there are all of these ethical questions about getting money from the government and what that does to our ability to hold the government accountable, for example. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't get money from the government or that that's entirely problematic or that those ethical questions can't be answered. But I do think that we need to rebuild our relationship with the public. And I'm interested just from the speakers that we've heard, how, you know, to what extent do we think that's possible in this age of free news, where, you know, it will be possible to access the ad-supported news, and we know that a lot of people aren't happy with those newspapers. But speaking from the perspective of the cable, where we've got a membership model, we're always trying to convince people to pay us monthly for the investigations that we produce. You know, how easy is it going to be to rebuild that culture of people paying for newspapers?
Thanks, Elise. That's rebuilding the idea of actually when you bought newspapers, it was easier to pay, wasn't it, with cold hard cash rather than nowadays we have to get out our cards and work out a method of payment. Alex, I'm going to pick on you because I said hello to you earlier on. Do you want to introduce yourself and tell us what you do here in Bristol?
Yeah, so I'm Alex Seabrook. I'm a local democracy reporter, so I write for the Bristol Post, Bristol Live, and sometimes a cable as well, so people haven't mostly about the council, what they do, what they don't do.
So did you have a bit of a run-in with the mayor?
I did, yeah, last summer, 6 weeks into the new job, we used to do fortnightly press conferences. We started talking that you can ask me any question you like. And the one question you didn't be asked, so then they stopped doing the press conferences after that. So I don't know if that's a good start or a bad start.
So what's your relationship with local government?
Yeah, it's okay. It's with Bristol City Council, it's not very friendly, but it's it works, it's functional. It's probably better with South Gloucestershire Council and the West of England combined authorities are there. A bit friendlier, a bit chattier for me.
So no more invites into the mayor's parlour?
No, not yet. Maybe after the next election.
Well, thanks very much, Alex. That's really interesting to see how, you know, local government as a body, as a corporate body, can have an impact on local journalism. So thanks for sharing that story.
Can I just say something quickly, just for the people on Zoom, just make sure that you speak up as much as you can, just so that everyone can hear.
Oh yes, sorry, I'm not sure if people can
Here's
hear.
the microphone, there, that goes through the speakers.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else want to contribute about local journalism before our break, which is coming up in 10 minutes? Yes, go ahead.
How much do the platforms get from the tech giants for these free stories a day, every day, 365 days a year? How much is it worth?
Emma, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I'm not actually allowed to say. They were willing to tell us how much they were giving to the big players. We've had to negotiate. I'm not the one that signed the NDA, but my colleague is. So I don't want to land Matt in hot water and end up scuppering the deal. But enough that it's exciting and it's transformative. It's enough to make a difference. It's not a pocket change.
Thanks, Emma. Donald, you're from Ujima Radio, a community radio station in Bristol, isn't that right?
That's right, yeah.
Do you have any involvement with the tech giants, or do you have any?
We have a lot of involvement with community. We have a lot of involvement with local news. We interview them there every week, live on our station. The free speakers, I was mightily impressed by all three, because I felt all of them touched on things that are relevant to our sector and what we're doing, and that we should have had been talking a few years ago. The one thing that one of the things I found most interesting was the conversation about setting up a fund. The fund that's missing from the conversation is the BBC licensing. Now, if you've got that on one side, and then you've got the other fund on the other side, and then you've got the tech companies putting money in the middle, then I think we have there should be enough money for a sustainable national platform for local providers to work, something that could work and could help the BBC become more local, because they're not, and can help the commercial sector become more local, because they're not. But we genuinely are, and so are the journalists there. Everybody, the quality goes up for everyone.
And have you had any, did you think like Ujima Radio should be part of the local democracy reporting scheme, for example? Did you bid for any of the positions, for example?
No, I didn't. I did speak at the BBC symposium, actually, where I suggested that they give us, instead of giving money to local newspapers, they gave it to community radio stations. Because if we had a local journalist at our station, then that person would not just be producing free items a day, but they want to be training people, working with the other local organisations, working with the universities and the colleges, and so doing something much more holistic. The social infrastructure bit that I mentioned, I wanted to speak.
Yeah, and it's quite interesting that the lion's share of the local democracy reporting, Alex, I hope you don't think I'm speaking out of turn because you're employed directly by Reach, isn't that right? I mean, they go to Reach and all the other big players. So would you think, Donald, that like radio stations and local, maybe the Bristol Cable or Voice Magazine or, you know, any other local publication should maybe collaborate the way has been suggested by
collaboration. Yes, all of us should be working together because we're all going down the same road and focusing on a completely different kind of journalistic landscape. Well, it's definitely tied to the community. It's the only way it's going to survive, because it's becoming more and more the direction comes further and further away.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Emma, go ahead there.
No, that's okay. Actually, there are a percentage of the LDR contracts that are held in local newsrooms. A few of our members have them. I sat on the board originally of the LDR scheme, and in its first format, when the idea was first formed, it was not fit for purpose for independent newsrooms at all. So we did a lot of collaborating and sort of working back and forth. And so that's when there was a 2-tier system that was brought in, whereby you had to be set up and established as a business, and you had to employ at least one member of staff originally before you could access the scheme at all. And then that was just so that you could employ somebody. And then there was a second tier where you could, as long as you were a quality and reputable news publication, then you could access the content. And that's why we rushed to get ICNN formed, and as quickly as we did. It was always something we were working towards. We'd already started national a national tour, just asking everybody, did they want a representative body? But by being a member of ICNN, you were then classed, the BBC was satisfied that you were classed as a quality and reputable news publisher. Some smaller newsrooms have opted to not to employ somebody, because it's just additional work to do PAYE. You have an additional member of staff when you can get the content anyway. It's worked better in some areas than others, because some organisations, larger news ones, your Newsquest and your Reach, have tried to just see them as an extra member of staff. If anybody's seeing that as an issue, they can come to us and we can liaise with the BBC and explain, where the issues are arising. But we are aware, so in Caerphilly, in South Wales, the LDR contract for the first term was held by Newsquest, and then when that was renewed, it was given to the Caerphilly Observer, which is run by Richard Gurner. And we've just liaised with Creative Wales and secured a pot of funding for the equivalent of an LDR reporter for Wales, to sit and cover the Senedd. So there's been no dedicated Senedd reporter in Wales since 2017. I think Newsquest or Reach were the last ones to take their reporters out in 2017. So we're about to get a dedicated Senedd reporter for Wales that works in the same way. So again, this comes back to, speaking up, speaking loudly, not just sitting and accepting the status quo. We need to have confidence to say, we can do this just as well, and start thinking outside the box and collaborating and talking to each other and saying, how can we have a slice of this pie, and just going for it.
Thanks, Emma. I think Bristol of all places is a place where they don't accept the status quo.
They don't. And I forgot to add earlier that our tech partners are Omni Digital, and they're based in Bristol, and they are absolutely fabulous. The team at Omni Digital, we are so honoured and delighted to be working with them. So the Ping platform, all the tech side of it is all made in Bristol.
Excellent, made in Bristol. So any journalists made in Bristol who want to have a quick chat about what we've heard so far? Linda, do you want to?
I'd just like to say about the LDR scheme that it's been made a huge difference to the voice papers. Quite a bit have signed up to them now. Because the way that the papers are funded, the voice papers are free newspapers. They are 50% outside and 50% editorial. So the site depends on the action have, and they pay the journalists. They pay the journalists for a certain amount of days a month to work on them. We were finding we were going and sitting through council meetings. We just weren't paid enough to sit for 4 hours at council, where you might not see the story. So to have that source material from the LDRs, it has been really improved our papers. It helped the public interest in journalism.
Yeah, thanks very much, Linda, for that insight into how it's working for your local publications, because it was a series of magazines, isn't it?
It's a series of titles, 17 titles in different areas, mostly Bristol, a couple of outlying areas, but mostly within areas of Bristol. And it's interesting what Jonathan said at the beginning about everywhere is different. Even within Bristol, everywhere is different. People often say Bristol is a collection of villages, and that each of our titles reflects the community that it works for. So for example, across the road, Bishop's Voice is very sort of art, because that's kind of what is in that area, whereas West Henleys and Westbury, which is a lot more retired people, but the content reflects the area that we're working.
Well, thanks very much for your contribution, and can I ask everyone to give a round of applause to Rachel, who's with us, Emma and Jonathan, for their insight. Okay, we've got, I think, some teas and coffees already next door, so we'll have a break for about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back for Francois now, who will be telling us about News Future 2035. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. I'm just going to mute us for 10 minutes and we'll be back.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Hello. Sorry, bear with me. I think somebody's trying to get through. Who's that? Who is that?
It's Francois.
Oh, hey, Francois. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Lovely to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you, man. We're just having a quick 10-minute break and then it will be you.
Yeah, that's why I just want to test the tech.
Yeah, go ahead. Do you have slides?
I do, so I just want to make sure.
Yeah, go ahead. See, just check that your sharing is all working. Hey, yeah. Just make sure.
Right.
I might pin Francois now, actually, because he'll be up next. There we go.
Can you
Yeah, I can see you fine.
Great.
All good.
So, I'm going to be asking people to fill in a VBox questionnaire. So I just want to make sure that people can read that QR code that's on this
my phone.
and that if you could test that, that would be amazing.
Francois, I'm not sure that it's going to be clear enough, actually. I can't seem to get it on my...
Okay, I'm gonna have to try to let me take this one off because that can you read the other one?
No, I can't read either of them. I think because the projector is not, it's not, you know, once you project it onto a big screen like that, I don't think it's clear enough.
Okay, can you try to just log in via vvox.app?
Yeah,
and
let me go.
type in that ID.
I'm trying as well.
Yeah, okay. It's taken me to a page that says UE local journalism, but there's no button or anything.
Yeah, it'll start if you're there and you've logged in. And
Yeah.
Basically, I haven't started I haven't opened anything. So as long as I can do that now, just a second. So I just need to. I might need to do this on 2 different screens because of the fact that I'm sharing a whole screen.
Yeah, that okay, great. Yeah, that I can see now that poll is open there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's open to you.
Yeah, so we'll get everybody to do it via the ID rather than the QR code then.
Great. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. That's brilliant. I'm gonna just log in from my phone and here so that I can do both.
Okay, great.
Okay, enjoy the coffee. See you later.
All right, see you in a moment. Thanks, Francois.
Bye.
Hi, everybody. Hi, everyone on. We're going to start again now. So we'll pass over to you shortly, Francois. I think, do you want to introduce Francois quickly? Are you there, Francois?
I am indeed.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, Una's going to introduce you shortly, and then we'll be ready to go.
Great.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Well, I hope you all found the break was useful, and certainly lots of food for thought, lots of connections are being made in the coffee tea break that we had there. So thanks everyone for having a good chat with each other and just finding out what other people are doing. And that key word of collaboration that Emma said earlier on, I think that's really something that we really need to work hard on within the independent journalism sector if we're going to move forward. So I'd like to introduce now someone who has been really very instrumental in me taking this full-time post in Bristol. I don't know if he knows it. Last year I did a course at UCLan on journalism, innovation and leadership. And not only did I think about how we developed our business in the independent journalism sector, but we also talked about what our own career and personal goals are. And my goal was to actually do full-time teaching for this year, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to do it here in Bristol. So thank you, Francois, for the help and the opportunity to go on that course, which was actually sponsored by the Google News Initiative. So yeah, we've all had to maybe reach out to the tech giants and advise over the years. So Francois has instigated a really interesting project called News Futures 2035, and I'll hand over to him now to explain what's it all about. Thank you very much, Francois.
Thank you very much, Una, and hello, everybody. I'm really honored to have this opportunity to join you virtually today. I wish I could have been there in person, but unfortunately, as the train strikes have stood in our way today. Before I go on, I'd like to just also introduce my colleague, Camilla Romero. Camilla is, please.
Hi, everyone.
Great. So Camilla is a postdoc researcher working with us in the Media Innovation Studio. I want to pick up on two themes and maybe zoom out a little bit. One of the themes is collaboration. That is constantly coming through, not just collaboration amongst the people in this room, but collaboration with other actors and stakeholders in this whole landscape of local journalism, but journalism and news in the ecosystem. So that's the one theme we're going to do, to try to address today. And then the other one is, I want to say, I'm really going to ask for your inputs today. So please be ready to join us. I'm just going to, we're going to be we're going to be using the VVox tool to ask you some questions along the way. So before I get cracking, if you could just, I'll come back to this, but if you're able to go to vvox.app on your phone or your laptop, or either way, and just type in that little ID if apparently the QR code isn't working. And then we'll be inviting you to share some of your thoughts, because there's some of us here who have some ideas, but I know there's a lot of powerful insights in that room today, and I would like to try to capture some of that as well. So I want to zoom back a little bit. There's a lot of anxiety around this question that we're asking today. Whether or not that comes from Brexit or the infodemic or the war and Putin, or Putin's war on Ukraine, or whether there's these conversations about news deserts or fake and fact news, lots of initiatives to try to address those as well. But the issue isn't just how we know, but the issue is how do we know it's true and trustworthy? There's lots of information out there. Information isn't the problem. It's, do we know the information is trustworthy? And those anxieties are not just those from people in the journalism space or those directly worried about local journalism. Those are anxieties for parents, those are anxieties for banks, those are anxieties for doctors, those are anxieties for politicians. Those are general anxieties. And there's also a great deal of action. We've heard already today Jonathan and the work Rachel's doing, and Emma is an absolute hero of our space. You know, people have been working really hard to try to find ways to create and work on initiatives that will shore up and make the supply of trustworthy news in the public interest available. But what there hasn't been is some kind of shared visions about not just the future we don't want and the things we don't want to see today, but what is it we want to create? What would good look like in the future? Or I was Jonathan and I were both at the and Emma as well, was at the Society of Editors conference on Wednesday when Clive Myrie got an award, and where he ended up saying, you know, just look at America as a critical space where you know, he had, and I don't quote me directly, please go to their website, but you know, where he said where you can have news organizations that say night doesn't follow day. That is, and so it's how there's very divisive landscapes. So in the UK, what is it we want and what is it we don't want? And how do we get people together to co-create that, to try to think that through in a systematic way? So it's with that in mind that we launched the News Futures initiative. The idea was and is, and because we are not finished, to bring together people who are inside the news organizations and associated, people who are alongside that, academic policy actors, regulators, tech companies, etc., as well as outside civil society bodies, thought leaders, think tanks, together to try to get some shared visions about what future we want to make. Because of course, the future is not inevitable. As Emma and as Jonathan has clearly illustrated in the practical examples of what they've been doing, they are into what they're doing today is making a difference to tomorrow. And so we can shape the future, but let's we are thinking about how can we get some shared visions. And I want to say that we brought people in this room have participated. Una has participated, Jonathan has participated, Rachel's participated, Emma has participated, and many people I can't see today on this call and probably in the room have participated in this project so far. And the focal question is, how can the supply of trustworthy public interest news in the UK be secured? And our horizon was 2035. Unlike today's conversation, all our processes, except for one part that Jonathan was involved in creating a discussion paper, has been under Chatham House rules. So we did not attribute any of the information directly to any single participant, but we have been bringing people together so that people can speak freely with others and try to do that in a kind of safe space. So our objectives here is not just simply to answer the question, to create some shared images, some visions. We're not thinking there's one vision from one perspective, but there's multiple visions and around this focal question, but also to think through the implications of those visions. If this is what we want to do, or the future we'd like to have, what should we do? And if this is a future we want to avoid, what should we not do? And in the process of doing that, create and foster and inspire constructive networks to make that happen. And that, I'm sure, is what you'll take away from this day in Bristol, is you'll be meeting people who are sharing your passion to make a positive future happen for us. So just a couple of things I think that is important around our focal question. And the first bit is, we are thinking about the supply, and with that implicit in that term supply is that we are not thinking that there's a problem with random acts of journalism created by fantastic people that will contribute to the providing trustworthy public interest news. But what Emma has outlined in the agreement with the Google News Showcase is that 3 stories a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year takes people and resources, and that regular supply, that's an industry, big or small, private or public. We need to have reliable supply for this ecosystem of trustworthy public interest news. The other bit is we are not looking for trusted news. I want to just underline that. We do not want one perspective that says you must trust me. Trust is given by the trusters. The people who are offering news can only offer their news to be trustworthy. And what we are not looking for is either a Labour government or Labour left-wing aligned coalition to say this is trusted, and the right-wing aligned coalition saying this is trusted, and that. We are saying we want to have some people to offer information that is trustworthy. The other bit is that our focal question is not news. our focal question is not journalism. Journalism, of course, news is, of course, just information beyond your personal experience. There's lots of, and journalism, of course, is the industrialization of that news collection and dissemination. We're not interested in news in general. There's plenty of news out there. And as King Cross pointed out, that the issue is not about news. The issue is about Francis ended up kind of looking at quality news as the problem. We are defining that as public interest news, and with the I just have to say, Jonathan has been absolutely central to this. So please, as has Emma, they both sit on our steering board. So we have learned a lot from how the Public Interest News Foundation defines public interest news, and take that on board as our definition in terms of what it might look like from a producer's point of view and the characteristics it might have. But we also incorporated through our study the notion that from a consumer's point of view, and from the consumer's point of view, public interest news needs to be accessible. So while somebody in this slides ended up talking about the notion that we would have news that people should pay for and things like that, we're thinking about how should news be accessible, how should it be intelligible. Does everybody understand it when they get it? And can they assess it for themselves? And is it accessible? Can they make a judgment themselves? And then the final characteristic that we're looking from the consumer's point of view is that, is their authorship clear? So those are the elements of our question, and we're going to come to you with some questions, but I'm just going to ask Camilla to very briefly tell you about the process so far.
Hi everyone. So as Francois mentioned, we started off with a steering board, which includes Emma and Jonathan, who are here. Thereafter, we commissioned a discussion paper whose authors are also Jonathan, Francois, and Jeremy Clifford, who's the former editor-in-chief of JPI and Archant. And thereafter, we had 3 plenaries. So we started with a plenary in October in London, where we asked various stakeholders from inside, outside, and alongside the news industry to discuss the current issues affecting the industry. And thereafter, they narrowed it down to a list of critical uncertainties, which we tested in a Delphi expert panel study, which came between the 2 plenaries. And then we convened another plenary in Manchester in November, where 2 of those critical uncertainties, which were identified as the relevance of public interest news and the environment and the policy environment, were discussed. And stakeholders then came up with 4 different versions of the future in a quadrant of those critical uncertainties. And those were the scenarios. I've gone too quickly. Scenarios of what the future of public interest news might look like in 2035. And then when we came back to London again in February, we discussed the lessons from those scenarios and got to the point of implications and opportunities. And right now, what we're doing is consulting with a wider range of stakeholders, which will hopefully inform it will inform our report, which we're compiling at the minute to get it out in spring 2023. So back to you, Francois.
Thank you. I just want to say that, that we followed this process as Camilla has outlined, and we have come up with 2 key critical uncertainties that I'd like to get your feedback on. First, bit is that we've identified that the future of public interest news in the UK essentially will be shaped by lots of different things, but amongst those, or the key amongst those, are the critical uncertainties, i.e. the most important things our study found that would have the highest impact on this question, but also is the most difficult to predict what will happen. And for those, we've heard, you won't be surprised in the conversation today, perhaps, is the first bit is relevance. Relevance of public interest news to the audience, yes, to the news producers, yes, so it must fit in their business model, to the news makers, the journalists, yes, but also to society. And can we, if there was a question is, how can we persuade people to pay for our news? Can we show high relevance of our news to the users of our news, to our society, and other stakeholders? So high relevance requires us to innovate, and then we might create lots of great news from a producer's point of view, but it may have no relevance or no perceived relevance to our audience or to society at large, and we have conversations there about news avoidance, etc., etc. So the one bit was relevance, highly relevant and low relevance. And the other one, as that you can clearly see from the conversations today, is the importance of policy and regulation in this space, whether that's at supranational level with GDPR and those kinds of things, or some of the other legislation, the Markets Act and Online Safety Bill, and all of those that are coming through, or policies that are forcing organizations to support news or constrain the supply of public interest news. So those were the two critical areas. And what I know we're kind of overshot our time, but would it be possible to still very briefly ask you to answer some questions? I'm asking Una and them. Can we have 5 more minutes?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine.
Great, thanks. So if you could see, I trust you can see my screen that has the Vivox poll on it. Is that the case? Can somebody just tell me?
You'll be able to see it, but I'm just going to say it out loud just in case anybody can't see it at the back, Francois. So you're going to vivox.app, and the number is 131 566 295. Everyone got that? Wicked. Okay, looks like everyone's got it. Crack on, Francois.
Okay, let me just quickly go back. Sorry, I'm going to just, okay, let's just ask that question. So what do you, if you at that poll question, if you might just tell us, what do you think are the characteristics of highly relevant public interest news? We said that we need to innovate, create highly relevant public interest news, but what do you think the characteristics are of highly relevant public interest news? And please, just if you have any questions about my questions, please just raise them. We're just thinking about your top line ideas. You don't have to have full sentences. You can have words, phrases. And I'm just going to give you one more minute, and then we're going to move to the next question. Okay, we've got almost there. Thanks. 11 of the 15 people logged in. Thank you so much. Got another 12 seconds to go. Thank you. And we can see factual, people care about it because it matters. We are not going to have a chance to talk through all of this, but I'd be happy to take questions or revisit the results later. And of course, I'll be sharing. I'm happy to share all these results with anybody in this room. So the next quick question: what do you think highly irrelevant public interest news looks like? What are the characteristics of highly irrelevant public interest news? Thank you. We've seen 2 answers already. Just give you another minute. Quickly wrap that up. Okay, we've got 15 seconds, 10 seconds to go. Please, please pop your answer in. Thank you so much for your hard work on that. So what we're seeing is focus on celebrities, too niche to be widely in the public interest. I think that's a really interesting question that has little or no impact on the audience. It's a contradiction. Public interest news is relevant. Yeah, that I can see where that comes from. Thanks. Clickbait, etc. Okay. And this is super important for us, and I'm sure for Emma and Jonathan and others who are working with policymakers. What would you see would be the characteristics of highly enabling policy environment? What would an enabling policy environment look like? What characteristics? I appreciate this is hard work on a Saturday morning, and but I know we've got so many smart people in that room. We really want to capture your contributions. They really are making a difference. Thank you. We're almost there, 10 seconds. And then we just want to capture one more question. And that is, I think, are really going to be policy at local to encourage public philanthropy, funding streams that maintain independence. I think that's a really, so many important freedom of the press issues, absolutely vital. Many of you will know that I do world press trends for the World Association of Newspapers and News Publishers, and we are seeing press freedom issues in different guises, a real threat to news organizations, not just in developing environments, but in developed environments, where including, of course, not only the US, but others across the world, including our own. If you're thinking about local journalists being arrested by police for covering protests. So this final question, please. What are the characteristics of a highly constraining policy and regulatory environment? What do we want to avoid when it comes to policy and regulation? And just that, the last 20 seconds with that, I see for a lot of people that's really hard to think of. You know, sometimes we know what we want, but it's sometimes hard to put our fingers on what is it we don't want. I really really appreciate that. Political interference, how do we avoid that? A government involved in nepotism and a lack of diversity. I think that's an incredible, inflexible and narrow definitions of public interest news. I think that I'd love to speak and dig into that as well. I think it's one of the things we really do need to avoid as well. An environment that is geared towards the big players and profit maximization only. Absolutely. Fantastic stuff. And just one last thing, and I'm going to share this with everybody as well. What should be done? What should we do going forward? Anything that you think we should do? And this is our last final question. Is there anything you think that we're not doing or we should do more of? And when I say we, it's everybody in this room. We're all busy doing stuff, but what might we do more of, and what might we do that we're not doing to ensure the supply of trustworthy public interest news? And you've heard a lot of the work that Emma is doing, Rachel's inquiry, and of course what Jonathan and Camilla and I are doing. But are there other things you think we should be doing or should be done? Thank you so much, everybody, for your contributions. And I'm going to just, when we finished, flash the results on the screen so that you can see. Thank you to the organizers for indulging me a little longer than the time we had. While the final answers come in, please, if you have any questions for Camilla and I, or anybody else, Una and Eliz and others in the room have been a part of this process. Please reach out to them and ask them about it, or reach out to us. Independent regulators will get different perspectives, so we need more than one supplier. I think plurality is embedded in that. How do we make sure, perhaps, Emma, that it's not just one reporter at NewsQuest